Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pit Stop number 6. Today we have Andy and Nuke on the podcast, and thanks to Andy on the last episode there, we're going to be talking about death today. So, gentlemen, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Amazing.
And I'm doing so
Cooking,
well too.
cooking a little bit in this weather, but I'd rather that than the snow, so we're good.
Amen.
So like I said, talking about death, and I was talking with you guys before, and just it's a topic that I haven't personally had to deal with a ton in my life, but it's also something that I've always it's almost been the unknown factor of it has made it hard for me to support people in my life that are dealing with a loved one's death, and so. Not knowing the best ways to support them is always, made me want to learn more so that, I can be there for them. And so really excited that we're talking about it. And just to start, I'd just like to hear your guys' experiences in your life with death.
Yeah. So death has been an interesting topic, or I should say, I've had an interesting relationship with what it means to me. My first encounter with death was when I was 8 years old, 7 turning 8, and my dad passed away from cancer. And I remember seeing him for the last time before he was passing. And people were in the hospital room, people were crying, and I just didn't get it. I just didn't know what was going on. And I remember, and I love that we're going straight deep right now, right away. And I remember, this is actually, you know what? It's actually something my mom told me recently. It's not something I remember, but she told me that when we were at Dad's funeral, I was playing with the other kids. I wasn't even sad. And so there was this thing about, obviously, when you're younger, if no one's teaching you about death, you kind of have to come up with your own meaning of it along the way. Which I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. That was just kind of my experience. But if I were to be a parent today, I would be having conversations with my kid around death, among other things, in a healthy, conscious way. And it is going to be an uncomfortable conversation. And I would say those uncomfortable conversations are the ones that are most needed.
For sure. And I know you were pretty young, but do you remember when it actually started sinking in for you that you were realizing, what had happened and kind of the consequences of it?
Yeah, I believe that it was one of those. I'm just trying to access my memory bank here. I believe that it never really hit me, as you're asking. The realization of it came, but it was light. It was just like, oh, Dad's not coming back. Because I believe that when I was 8, I thought Dad was coming back.
Yeah.
I didn't know, and that's the educational piece, right? I didn't know that death meant someone was gone and wasn't coming back.
Yes, for sure.
And so when I was in my teenage years, I just remember, accepting it. And I wasn't accepting it as an internal growth thing. It was just like, okay, this is just life. This is how we're living. And it wasn't until recently, I would say within the past year and a half, where I finally was able to grieve my father's passing. And it was an emotional, a very subtle, but it was an emotional trauma that was stuck in my body. And I was able to break through it and finally grieve and say goodbye and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, no, that's so tough, obviously. And it's kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but it's interesting how, almost because it was a slow process for you of actually understanding and accepting it, that you never, like you said, got to have that, quote unquote, full grieving process for him. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing because one of the questions I had was, okay, if I went 20 plus years without a grieving process, what did that manifest into in my life?
Yes.
And I can't say that these are the concrete answers, but what did manifest in my life growing up was a troubled teenage years, I should say, plural. Disconnection early on in romantic relationships, not knowing how to navigate, not knowing how to
Yes,
navigate relationships. So that's just a couple examples of what came out of me not grieving. I believe me not grieving my dad's passing or coming to acceptance of it.
for sure.
Yeah.
Nuke, what about yourself?
My experiences with death weren't as early on as Andy. For me, a couple guys had passed away in junior high from high speed racing and what have you. So that concept of death was definitely there. I don't think it really hit home until a cousin of mine passed away, and it really impacted my mom. And I'd never seen my mom cry, and literally just holding her as she cried, and I was like, wow, like this is what death could look like. And in that moment, I was instantly scared and very fearful of that concept of death around my loved ones. And it wasn't until I got older and my Auntie Patty passed away, and that really rocked me, and I really felt it in my body, and just came to grips with really understanding this duality that is life and death, and really wrapping my head around it's all part of the journey. It's all part of it's all part of the circle of life, quote unquote. And
Yeah,
and Andy really hit the nail on the head there, that we don't talk about that in our society and culture, especially in the West, around death, because that concept is so organic and natural in everything that we do, right?
yeah,
Mother Nature is very much aware of that concept, and it is vital for the next generation to what to like come into play, right? And when we don't talk about certain things and we leave it in the dark, label it what you want to be, shame, fear, etc., 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 like nothing healthy comes out of that, you know. And
yeah,
case in point, a lot of us in the West, our relationship to death is pure sadness and a lot of questioning.
yes.
So yeah.
And so when you said that, you had that experience and you saw your mom cry, and it really scared you, the idea of death really scared you. Do you know specifically, where that fear came from? Was it the fear of your own death? Was it, having it affect you that much? Was it, the idea that, oh, I can actually lose these people in my life that I really care about and that I love? Do you know where it came from?
It was all of that, Jared. It was, for me in that moment, what it was, Jared, it was, wow, seeing my mom, who I've never seen cry, that something could impact her that much. You know what I mean? That
Yeah,
would quote unquote break this woman down, and she would be crying. Like, I've never to this day seen my mom cry like that and or react to anything. Do you see what I'm saying? And so
for
when you're
sure.
a child, you know, and you look up to someone like that, you're like, wow, like this death thing must be a big deal, you know? And
Yeah,
yes, you hear of people passing and what have you. However, you don't know um, until it really like just impacts your soul. You know, like if I were to paint a clear picture, I would just say I wasn't as conscious, right?
yeah,
And the minute I
yep,
became conscious, it was like, wow, like there's something here that needs to be confronted, and I need to figure this out. So yeah.
for sure,
Mm.
for sure. Yeah. And I guess a question for both of you is, why do you think that, we as a society have so much trouble like talking about death, or why it isn't, talked about more openly?
Mm. Yeah, Jared, Andy here. I can address that question. I believe that it isn't so much. I think it's hard for people to have this conversation. The common thing that I always hear is, "Oh, that's really morbid," Why would you talk about
Mm-hmm.
that? And Nuke said something in his share just earlier here around, label it what you want, fear. And I think it's just that, actually. I think it's fear. I think people are afraid to talk about it because there's a fear, not of death, but a fear of the uncertainty, fear of the unknown.
Yes.
Because on the other side of death, we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know what's on the other side of death. There are many stories about it. There are many tales and folklore and religious beliefs around what happens after death, but we really don't know. And so there's this thing about the word uncertainty that people fear. I've been there. I have feared uncertainty in other areas in my life outside of death, but I think death symbolizes the ultimate uncertainty.
Yeah, it's interesting where, kind of for as long as, humankind has been around, it's been one of those main questions, right? Of, and every culture's and religion's different beliefs on it. And you look back even to ancient Egypt and, their beliefs on death and how different they were from today, because it seems like one of those questions that we have always asked ourselves is what happens next.
Exactly. And also societally, we're also programmed in other areas of our lives. And I'm not saying this is everybody, but for a big chunk of society, we've been programmed to be safe, to be comfortable, to stay away from the uncomfortable or the discomfort or the risk, right? And so if there's a conditioning there, and having a conversation about uncertainty, aka death, is uncomfortable, then we don't go there. However,
Yes.
a big, deep belief that I take with me as often and as frequent as I can as a reminder is that death gives life meaning.
Yes. Yep.
To know that there's an end gives me life to show up in every moment that much better, that much more present, that much more loving.
For sure. No, that makes a ton of sense. Nuke, do you have anything to add on, why you think it's so difficult for people to talk about?
Yeah, what Andy said was absolute gold. And to echo that, it's that uncertainty piece, right? And because people aren't willing to go there to navigate that and figure out what that could look like, right? That leaves a disconnect, right? Because there's nothing wrong with being like, I don't know what life looks like post-death. And if that's where we stop, well, then we're not doing our higher selves any service, right? To me, now the work is fine. Now let's do the work of diving into our faith, into our spirituality, fill in the blank with whatever tool or exercise you want to do, but let's figure that out. So there isn't fear around that. There isn't this lack of abundance or scarcity mindset, right? Which then propels you, as Andy said really well, to then show up and be your best self. And also at the same time to know that to a certain extent, this too will come to an end. And what are you doing in that time? Right?
Yeah.
So I think that topic of death, and I'm going to caveat and say in the West, specifically in the West, because I know back home in Ghana, when someone passes away, it's not death, it's a celebration of life. And there is a 3 to 7 day celebration of this person's life, and so many parties and celebrations and what have you are done in honor of this individual. And on top of that, we don't believe that they're gone, which is something that's very powerful. And when I'm wrapping my head around, because, if you believe that your human existence is the only, and now I'm getting personal. So listen to my heart here, Jared. But if you believe that your human form is the only existence, then yeah, that can be scary. Because once Nuke is gone, right? Yeah. But if you believe that energy, as what's his name says, Albert Einstein says energy is never lost, right? It only changes form
Yeah.
or is recycled. So right off the
Yep.
bat, yes, Nuke isn't physically here, but that energy, that essence is elsewhere. And I fully believe that.
Yeah.
Like, no religion attached to that, no faith or spirituality. Like that's just physics.
Yeah. No, for sure.
I'm hearing Nuke speak here, and I have a thought that I want to add.
Yep, for sure.
And the one word, 3 letters, one word came up to my mind as he was speaking, and it was ego. And that our ego resists the fear of death, the loss of I, me, myself, Andy, or Nuke.
Yep.
That if that doesn't exist anymore, that's the most terrible thing ever. And the I, the me, the myself is the ego. And
Yes.
so there's this ego death also that we steer away from, ego death.
Well
Yes.
said.
Very, very good. Very
We're going
interesting.
deep.
And so, I mean, obviously, you know, experience death of somebody that's close to you, and sometimes even people that you're not close to, and, you know, whether it be somebody you look up to or, you know, a famous person, whatever it might be, but, you know, some of the most impactful events that you can go through. And so, do you guys have any, you know, coping mechanisms that you've used or that you've heard of to make sure that you get through that time in a healthy way?
Yeah, I would say because my closest encounter with death was when I was so young.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things that an individual can tap into if they're experiencing a loss of someone, a loved one, is multiple resources such like therapy. I think is very important to be able to talk about it in a safe place. I think allowing time to be a friend in the grieving process.
And what do you mean by that?
I mean that when we're overwhelmed with grief, I think one of the things that we as human beings want to happen right away is for the feelings to go away fast. I can't handle it. I don't want to deal with the sadness right now. I'm depressed. I want to get my life back on track. I lost a loved one. I don't know what to do. And I think the toughest thing you can do for yourself is to rush that process. Right. And so allowing yourself time and space to process all of that, and to also have healthy expectations around that 2 years down the road, you might have an episode where you're missing that person and the grief comes back, and just to remind yourself to know that also is a part of the process, that
it's okay. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I would say, like counseling / therapy, and then really that inner work.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that kind of what led you to finally processing and grieving the death of your dad?
The funny thing I would say about that situation for me was I never set the intention to grieve for my dad. I was doing my inner work. Okay. What came up with that is my masculine wound and my feminine wound.
Mm-hmm.
And the masculine and the feminine that brought me into this world was my mom and my dad. And so naturally, going on a journey of healing my masculine wound, I had to revisit what my relationship was like with my dad. Even though it was a brief 8 years, I had to revisit those 8 years, and then also revisit who I was after those 8 years, how his death impacted me and the man that I've become. And through that journey, I was able to land in a space where I was feeling called to write a letter to my dad. That was a part of my grieving process. And I think it's actually a beautiful process for anybody who has lost somebody to entertain. writing a letter to your lost loved one and telling them everything that you didn't get a chance to say. Because
Very
yeah, there's this
interesting. Yeah.
thing as well about losing a loved one is, oh, I wish I had a little bit more time so I could tell them this. And
Yes.
you may not be able to tell them in person anymore. However, you could still speak out your truth in some sort of way.
Yeah.
My way was in a form of a letter.
Yeah. No, very, very interesting. And just when you're talking about that, so what came up for me was most recently, it was the first experience that I had had with death since I was a child. Was my grandma actually passed away a couple months ago, and so now she hadn't been doing well for a while, and so it was expected a little bit, but one of the things was unfortunately I wasn't able to be there when she actually passed, but talking to my parents when they told me, they said that she was still at the hospital if I wanted to go say my goodbyes, and not knowing if that was something I wanted to do. And at first, even saying, no, I'm okay. And then as I thought about it half an hour later, I was like, no, you know what? Actually, I want to make sure that I don't regret missing that chance, right? To finally to properly say goodbye. And when I was there, I found myself doing something very similar of, speaking everything that I wanted to say. And, almost doing that, being able to do it, with her. But like you said, the act of being able to say it, whether it's through a letter or whatever it might be.
I have a question for both of you. And my question is,
sure.
What are your thoughts on losing a loved one when you're so young, like 6, 7 years old, versus losing a loved one when you're in your 30s, where there's already a deeper relationship established?
Jared, you have the floor.
All right. I think a lot of it kind of echoes in, the original story that you were talking about, Andy, where I think when you're so young, a lot of it doesn't sink in, of like, you don't truly grasp, the gravity of the situation, and that realization that in a lot of ways, death seems more final now than it might when you're young. And I think, like, personally, I think that a lot more of it becomes subconscious as you slowly realize it. And the process is almost extended. Whereas, when you're older, I think it hits a lot more all at once. And so I think a lot of people find that, more difficult to deal with, because now it's, almost all of the weight of the reaction coming in a very short amount of time, and, forcing you to deal with it in healthy or an unhealthy way. Instead of it slowly sinking in as you more understand it when you're young.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's a really good piece of I think it's just a nice reminder, to be honest.
For sure. What about you, Nuke? Do you have anything?
I really like what you said there. For me, I definitely think it's twofold. One, when you're younger, you being able to process someone's death may not land with you as clearly as when you're older, and so that can be a blessing in disguise. But then at the same time, when you're older, and you have more of an established relationship with that person, someone passing away, I would like to think you have more healthy coping mechanisms and resources at your disposal, right? Versus when you're younger, you may not have that self-efficacy, that self-awareness to be able to process and rationalize and sift through what you're feeling and or what you're not feeling, right? I would say if I had to choose one, I'd rather be at this age, because then at least I'm able to then sift through my conscious versus my subconscious and my emotions. Because when you're younger, sometimes it can be harder because you're only still learning about them and or they haven't even surfaced yet to a certain extent. But it's still impacting you. That's the thing. At the end of the day, it's still impacting the body and the vessel. So whether or not you're consciously aware of it or not is besides the point. Well, is to me the real indicator.
Yes.
Yeah. There's there are differences and then there are commonalities.
Yeah.
And a commonality between whether you lose somebody when you're young versus when you lose someone when you're older that has just come to me is the importance of communication around death.
Yeah.
I want to just come full circle back to that.
Yeah.
I remember an exercise I did as a part of a retreat. And a part of this exercise, I was relinquishing any anger that I may have had towards my dad. And I would speak out a sentence stem. And the sentence stem was, Dad or Father, I'm angry at you because. I'm angry at you because.
Yes.
And I kept on saying that, whatever came up. And one of the things that came up that's never come up before was, Dad, I'm angry at you because I wish you just pulled me aside when I was 8 years old and just told me that you weren't coming back.
Yep.
That was huge for me because that's, I didn't know I was holding anger towards that. And even if his story in that moment was that he's young, he won't get it. The effort and the remembrance of a conversation is better than no conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
And just to echo exactly what Andy is saying, and something that I'm learning when it comes to death, again, this conversation, and I'm going to say it until kingdom come, we have nothing in the West, you know what I mean, from K to 12 talking about death and educating kids about it, right? Because it is all going to impact us at some point in time in our life, whether it's a friend, a family, or someone we know. And the fact that we don't talk about this monumental piece of what it means to be a human blows my mind. Like it does, because we are cutting ourselves off from so much learning, so much growth, and so much healing. And I think that is doing us a disservice when we get older, because then we don't know how to respond to death or losing someone, right? Versus if this was an ongoing conversation and dialogue from whatever age, I think it would be of a lot more benefit for when we're older. It would plant the seed and it would nourish and develop so that when we're older, oh, that's what they meant. Oh, that's what my body was telling me. As opposed to, I've never felt this before. I've never dealt with this. What do I do? And now we're just reacting. Now we're in our boy energy. Now we're in our girl energy. And nothing in this situation is going to be healthy coming out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, just while both of you were talking, and it kind of leads me to my next question is, I think one of the most difficult things about death is, for one, everybody reacts differently, right? Everybody will react slightly differently who knew that person. And everybody will have, a more dominant emotion associated with that death, whether it be sadness or whether it be anger, whether it be frustration, whether it be denial. And it also varies from death to the death in that person's life of, they're going to react differently to, say, one of their parents passing as opposed to one of their friends. And I think it's one of the things that makes it so difficult is a lot of times you don't know how you're going to react. And especially, you don't know how those around you are going to act. And so, as I said in the beginning, because there is such that wide variety of emotions and responses, and they change over time, with the different stages of the grieving process. Have you guys had to support people around you that have experienced death? And, how have you done that? Or what do you look for from other people when they're trying to support you through that grieving process?
I can speak to this on both ends as well. And it's interesting because the word death can be associated with the end of someone's life, but the word death could also be associated to like an ending of a relationship. Mm-hmm. The death of a relationship, yes. Right? And the one of the first things that came to my mind was I was supported at the end of a relationship of mine by Nuke, actually. And what he did was he just every morning, or almost every morning, he would send me a message and say, "You good? Checking in." That simple text message went such a long way for me. And the intention behind his message, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Nuke, was you weren't trying to fix me or solve my problem. Mm-hmm. You were just saying, "Hey man, I'm here, reach out."
Preach.
And I think that is one of the most impactful and one of the most simple things that anyone can do if they're supporting someone who's grieving or have been grieving a death, whether that's a relationship or a life or whatnot. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I think what Andy just said is absolute gold. So once again, I've been on both ends of the spectrum. And when, for example, I lost my auntie, and talking with my cousin, when I saw him after the funeral and even after, we just hugged each other and cried. And just cried.
Yeah.
Like mourned. And then after that, I just said, "I love you," and reach out to me. There was no advice. There was, you know what I mean?
Yep.
There wasn't, "I miss her" or whatever. It was like, "Dude, I love you," and reach out to me when you need to. And that's always been the communication. Mm-hmm. And for me, and then later on the receiving end, if I were to lose someone when that happens, all I want to know is that you're there. That's it. That you're there, yep. And that you care, and that I'm not alone. I don't need to, we don't have to romanticize it, or you don't have to hold my hand. Just let me know that you're there and that you care.
Yeah, I think we have to be, language is so important. And I think one of the things that we have to be careful of when we're supporting someone that's grieving is to say things like, "It's all going to be okay. Don't worry," or "You'll be fine."
Yeah.
And though that may sound okay on the outside looking in, for the person that is actually grieving, that's not what they're ready to hear.
Yep.
And I think the truth is, we're all going to be fine at the end of the day. We're all going to be okay. However, that's not fully acknowledging the present moment and what that person is actually experiencing. It's denying it, actually.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. And, my eyes were kind of opened a little bit in our men's group when one of the guys who unfortunately has dealt with a lot of death in his lifetime, just a simple sentence that he shared with us was how every death that he has experienced has been different depending on who it was and his relationship with them. And that, why it opened my eyes was because, with never knowing how to support, and feeling like it's different each time, and just feeling like I wasn't getting it. But because of, just that simple sentence of "that's because it is different every time," made a ton of sense to me. And then I think goes along perfectly with what both of you guys were saying is, really, in supporting somebody, you just they want to know that you're there. Right. And so that open communication with them of just, I'm here for you, whatever you need, instead of trying to make it better.
Something I like to add to that, Jared, as well, is I think with death and when we're trying to help someone, our intentions are good. Our intentions are well. Everything will be fine. They were great. We love them. We miss them. Blah, 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 blah. However, and in those moments, sometimes all that person wants for you is just to sit there with them, right? Or hey, just go for a walk, right? And nothing needs to be said, right? Nothing needs to be said. I just want your presence there, and don't try and don't try and sugarcoat what's going on. It sucks. It hurts. I don't have any words for you, and I'm here. That, to me, that's what I want to hear from my boy. It sucks. It hurts. I don't know what to tell you, dude, and I'm here for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess also just to share, so on my experience, and both of you guys were there, was I ended up, I went to the men's group when my grandma was really going downhill. And, again, without dealing with any sort of death since I was a child, I didn't know how I was going to react. And I was really surprised to find that it actually brought up a lot of feelings towards my family and a lot of anger at them for, things that I'd been holding in and maybe didn't even consciously know that, I was still angry about. And, I think for me personally, that showed me that, just whenever you experience a loss like that, whatever the feeling is that you feel, there's no what you should feel. It's just allow yourself to feel whatever comes up for you. Just allow it, and don't try to repress
Jared.
it.
Ditto. Whenever we say should or shouldn't, we're micro judging ourselves, and the last thing we should be doing. In the midst of a grieving process.
For sure. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about was actually something that you brought up earlier, was, thinking about your own death and, having a healthy or unhealthy relationship with that. And I know a lot of people, myself included, just don't think about it. And I think, Andy, it was you that asked me a while back, just kind of in passing of, do you think about your own death? Or, and I just said, no, it's kind of out of my mind. And so just your guys' opinion on, if you think about it yourselves, your own death, and, the healthy or unhealthy ways that you've seen either in yourself or in others think about it.
I'll start off by saying that I'm inspired by death when I first heard about the warrior culture back in the day, samurai culture specifically, where the samurais in meditation daily, they would contemplate their own death. And they do that because it helps them fall so deeply in the present moment when they are moving into battle or with their loved one or with their family, or if maybe they're eating a meal, this might be my last meal. Or if they're with their lover, this might be the last time I'm connecting with my lover. Or if I'm playing with my kid, this might be the last time. And not that we are seeking death, because there's a difference between seeking death and contemplating death. Seeking death is going out there and being unconsciously reckless and all that stuff. Contemplating death is just bringing the realization of the possibility in mind. And I think I don't know where this quote came from, but the quote was, the only thing certain in life is death. The only thing certain in life is death. Yes. We will all arrive there. And so I contemplate, to answer your question a little bit more directly, I contemplate death weekly. It's not something I think about every day, but I think about it weekly. And I had a conversation with one of my coaching clients last week, and he asked me, he was like, so what motivates you? And it's been a long time since someone's asked me that. And so I closed my eyes and I took a deep breath and I opened my eyes and I looked at him and I was like, death motivates me. To know that I could walk across the street and I could be hit by a car. To know that if that were to happen, asking myself, did I live my life to the fullest? Did I speak all my truths? Did I hold back at all in my life? That's the contemplation of death.
Yes.
Not when am I going to die? Right? Because contemplating an answer you will never know is a part of a definition of insanity. But contemplating death as in, how could I be better today knowing that tomorrow is not guaranteed?
Preach.
Yeah.
Yeah,
what about you, Nick? Do you have anything to add?
It's interesting that you bring that question up because I've had this conversation with my mom numerous times, and it's funny because when I turned 30, I thought for sure I was gonna die. I was ready to die. I told her I was you know, Mom, like I'm not suicidal. All is well. I'm healthy. I don't owe anybody money or anything. But I just told her like I feel like I'm ready to go, like whenever. And she's like, really? And I was like, does that make me crazy or suicidal or depressing? And she's like, no, I just think that you're fully aware that every day is precious, right? Every day is a gift, right? Every day is a present. And just like Andy said, like, what are you doing to be grateful and in this moment and show gratitude, right? And I think that's what the mindset is all about when you contemplate your death. It's what are you grateful for right now in this moment? And knowing full well that it can be gone at any moment in time, right? If the universe gave it to you, the universe can take it away from you at any point in time. And you can't say anything, right? And a really good friend and mentor of mine, he says, like, everything that you have, you're borrowing. So if you come from that mentality,
interesting.
Sweet. What are you doing with the time that you are borrowing, with the gifts that you are borrowing, with the connections you are like? Do you see what I'm saying? And it gets very existential, very philosophical.
Yes.
And it's like, what are you doing with the time you've been given? And so to me, when you ask that question, that's what comes up to me. And I think everybody should be doing that. And I love what Andy said. Like, we're not talking about morbid ways to go out or to die or what have you. No, we're just trying to get ourselves to realize that every day is a blessing. And what are we doing about it? How are we impacting the world? How are we leading ourselves? How are we speaking our truth? And what have you, and not getting into this selfish me, myself and I, you know, like ego mindset, because that's not serving anybody at the end of the day. It really.
Yes. No, I love that. And actually, while both of you guys were talking, I wrote down kind of my new take on it of, are you living in appreciation or are you living in fear? Right? Are you thankful for every day and everything that you have, or are you scared that it's going to be taken away?
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
That.
That's a beautiful. That's something that you should put on your wall, I think. Honestly, like a daily reminder. It reminds me of something one of my teachers taught me in the past year. And he said that his name is Marcus, and he said that when it comes to death, don't give up, give in. And giving up means I'm at mercy to it. Giving in means I accept it for what it is, and I'm going to continue my life day by day, moment to moment, living my truth to the best that I can. Giving in versus giving up.
Love that. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, I really like that. But that's actually all I had for you guys. Are there any parting shots or anything else that you guys wanted to say on the
Something
topic?
that comes up for me when we talk about death, contemplating, and I know I've one with you, Jared, and also with Andy, with just us being 3-part beings,
Mm-hmm.
right? Our soul, our body, and our mind, right? And something that comes up for me constantly is this notion of, our soul and what we're doing here on this plane, on this realm, right? And it's just making sure that I don't get caught up in the duration of my life, like that getting in the way of how impactful I can be. You see what I'm saying? And this notion that the longer that I live, the more impactful I could, like, does that make sense? That dichotomy?
Yes.
That I'm trying to explain. And so it's just making sure, like, hey, like, I'm in my, like, we're both in our early 30s. I don't know about you, Jared, but I know Andy and I are. And it's making sure that in those moments, we are doing king shit, we are being in our truth. We are exhibiting king, warrior, magician, lover energy constantly. And if I go today, then sweet. I hope and pray that duration that I had, that I was blessed with, it was full, and I wasn't living, like, when I'm 60, I'll be able to really, you know what I mean? Impact the world and make a difference. It's like, no, like you, like Gandhi, like be the change you want to see right now. Literally right now, be the change.
Yes.
And you know what? Micro, baby steps. And then when you look back, you can be like, all of these steps have led to my greatness now. It wasn't just one step that I walked into greatness. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And for me, what came up was, duration does not equal.
Thank you for condensing that. Thank you,
right?
Thank you for that.
Like you were saying, of just because you've been around longer doesn't automatically mean that you've had more impact, and vice versa. And the other phrase that just came into my mind was, there's no better day than today. Right. And like you're saying, why wait until you're 60? Why wait until next year? Why wait until you're quote unquote ready? Like, why not start today?
I love that. I would say my parting statement / reminder for whoever's listening to this at the moment would be, death is very much a part of your life. And to deny that within you is to deny your whole self. And so if you want to live a life of responsibility and ownership being full ownership, all parts of yourself, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, labels, whatever, doesn't matter. Really invite yourself to reimagine a new definition or a new story of what death means.
Yes. Let's reimagine that word, that mindset, that attitude. Andy, well said, brother.
Yeah, beautiful.
Whew, that was great.
I love it. That was amazing. Thank you both so much for being on. And
man,
we're definitely gonna have to do this again.
Podcast thing is kind of awesome. It's different energies.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, you guys, thanks so much for being on. And
Jared, thank you, homie.